Welcome to the Shoulda Bet More podcast presented by Gold Boys. Coming up on the show, Jeff Parles will join us. We'll go over all things Major League Baseball, get his thoughts on the finals, some NFL. So it's been a while since we talked to Jeff. Excited to talk to him, and a couple quick things from the weekend before we get to Jeff. First off, I'm not ready to quite pick the finals yet. I'm leaning towards Boston at 7. If I had to pick right now, I think that's who I'd pick. That's probably who I'll land on. But with this long layoff, and I actually don't mind the long layoff. People say, hey, out of sight, out of mind, it's going to hurt. The ratings hurt people's interest. It might, and the playoffs have not been good. Let's be honest. The playoffs have been really bad with all the blowouts, the short series, bad games, injuries, you name it. It's been a very disappointing playoffs. I don't know. Maybe the week off, it's a little bit of a Super Bowl feel for it where you get a week to build the hype, build the anticipation. So I'm looking forward to it. I don't mind the layoff here. I will say my one final thought was looking for sleepers for MVP, which usually you don't get sleepers for MVP. Usually it's pretty chalk. It's, hey, LeBron wins for his team. It's the best player on whoever wins. It's the star of whoever wins. Could Drew Holiday win it with the same formula as Andre Iguodala winning in 2015, where he was like 100-1 and he won because he guarded LeBron? And the narrative was, hey, he shut down LeBron, even though LeBron had put up ridiculous numbers in that series. Some of his percentages, his efficiency weren't as good. And I actually thought Curry should have. I actually thought LeBron should have won even on a losing team. But if you're going to give it to anyone that year, I would have still given it to Curry. But Iguodala won it because of the narrative. I wonder if Drew Holiday, who's probably going to be guarding Jokic a lot in this series, I wonder if he could win it with the narrative. Hey, he holds Luka to a couple of bad shooting performances, does enough on offense, hits some threes, has a couple 20, 25-point games with really good defense. I wonder, would like a little more at 50-1, but that's at least something that crossed my mind. So that's the NBA. Still got a few days to make a decision on who I'm going to pick, leaning towards Boston at 7. It's actually been since 2016 that we've gotten a game 7 in the NBA Finals. We've gotten a bunch of 6-gamers. Last year was 5. There was a sweep thrown in there. And we haven't had a 7-gamer in, it's almost a decade. Hard to believe that 2016 Warriors Cavs was 8 years ago. But maybe we're due for one. Maybe we get a long series. We kind of, not that we're owed anything, but maybe we're owed a really classic NBA Finals after what's been a dud of a playoff. So that's the NBA, which will start Thursday night, as Boston is a pretty sizable favorite in game 1 and for the series. I do think that's a lot of points for game 1. I would be inclined to take the 6.5. It's only a matter of, hey, do you take the 6.5 or do you hope you can get a 7, which is a key number in the NBA? But either way, I do like Dallas plus the points in game 1. Figure those games will be pretty competitive and no real discrepancy, no real advantage one way or another with the rest because both teams have a lot of rest. So that's the NBA. Quickly on baseball, the Yankees are just an absolute freight train. They enter Sunday 42-19, and Cole has not thrown a pitch for them. Now, they enter Sunday tied with Baltimore for the loss column. So usually when you're 23 games over 500 on June 2nd, you built a nice little cushion. That's not been the case because the Orioles have hung tight here, but you figure the Yankees will probably win that division. And right now, the Yankees, not only the best team in the American League, in my opinion, the Yankees are the best team in baseball. They have the two best offensive players, two best players in the league hitting back to back, and they get a well-pitched game every day. Now, it's not a perfect team. Rizzo can be an issue at times defensively. He doesn't really hit anymore. You can nitpick. I don't love Holmes, but boy, they get good pitching performance after good pitching performance. Schmidt did get hurt, so that kind of ends the discussion a little bit for, hey, when Cole comes back, who does he bump? Well, Schmidt's hurt, and these things have a way of working themselves out, is the expression, and that tends to be the case where we'll see once Cole finally does come back. Schmidt, it's looking like a lengthy absence here for Schmidt, which will leave Heel intact. And obviously you have Rodon and Stroman and Cortez. It's a good rotation. It's not a great rotation, but an absolute juggernaut. What Judge is doing, pair him with Soto, and you get enough from Verdugo, and Volpe's turned into an all-star. I mean, it's just a great team. It's the same thing I'm talking about before the season. I was high on them coming into the season. There was that Monday when Judge and Cole both went for an MRI. I was like, oh my God, forget all the enthusiasm. How could you feel good about this team? They're always hurt, all that. But that's long forgotten. Now, look, being the best team on June 2nd, you don't hang a banner for that. That's not the idea. You don't win. You don't get a trophy for being the best team on June 2nd. And they do have the best run differential heading into Sunday at plus 105. Just a gaudy record, just an incredible. And West Coast, a place they usually struggle. That's not the case this year. They go to the West Coast and more than hold their own here and have some good wins. But I mean, there's gonna be some pressure on them come October. Haven't been to a World Series in 15 years. Obviously, haven't won a World Series in 15 years. A lot of losses to the Astros. They're going to need to win, at least get to a World Series this year. But I think they're fully capable. This does remind me a little of the 2009 team, where they're just relentless on offense, good enough pitching, and it's just a very deep, very well-rounded team. So the Yankees are an absolute juggernaut. Not that there's any value on them to win the World Series at the current numbers, just because they're the best team, they have the best record, and they have the best run differential. And they're the Yankees to begin with, so you're never gonna get a bargain on the Yankees. Especially when they're no lock to win the division. But the Yankees are just an absolute freight train. right now. And they're looking like, I don't know, 105, 107 win team. They are that good. They are really, really that good. The thing is, Judge and Soto, one of them is going to be hot at all times. And when both of them are hot, forget it. It's just, it's impossible to pitch to them. So that's the baseball. Quickly here, probably my first time talking WNBA on this show. The WNBA has got to do a better job here. Clark, I don't know if people saw this on Saturday. She took the dirtiest cheap shot you'll ever see. She's just standing basically under the hoop by the free throw line, not even involved in the play. And a girl from, I guess it was the Chicago team, the Chicago Sky, Carter, comes and just basically clips her from behind, checks, knocks her to the ground. I mean, if you're the WNBA, this is not the first time she's taken one of these cheap shots. If you're the WNBA, first of all, you've been around 25 years. You can't draw flies. Nobody in the world watches your sport until this year. You finally got a little buzz, a little attention. You have to protect it. You have to protect your star. You have to do everything you can. Find that girl, suspend her as much as you possibly can, and send a message to the rest of the league. Hey, it's not going to be open season here on our best player. I know there's some jealousy with Clark. I know there's a target on her back. There's definitely a racial component to it. You have to protect Clark better than this. You have to send a message because you can't just let this be, hey, everyone take a shot at Clark. It's no big deal. I mean, that was ridiculous what happened on Saturday. And I don't care about any of these teams. I don't really watch these games, but I saw that. And look, you finally got a little buzz for a sport that's had no buzz, no interest, no popularity, absolutely zero. Again, you don't draw flies. You're on ABC, you play a best of 3 finals, and you get less than 1 million people. Nobody watches your sport until this year. You finally got a star in Clark and some of these other rookies. You got to do a better job of protecting her. That was absolutely ridiculous. We'll see if there's a fine or suspension with the girl for the Chicago team. I think it's Carter. I mean, just completely ridiculous, completely out of bounds. And nobody holds these girls accountable, and nobody protects her. I mean, somebody's got to step up and say, hey, this isn't happening. And somebody on Clark's team, by the way, has got to not let this happen. I know they don't make much money and they're all afraid of getting fined, but that cannot happen. You cannot let that. I mean, the NFL doesn't let you just take cheap shots at Mahomes. If you breathe on Mahomes, you're going to get a penalty and a fine and all that. And hey, maybe they go over the top with it, but you got to protect your stars. If you're the WNBA, this is your asset. This is your star. Even though the team isn't any good, you got to do something to send a message to the rest of the league that this can't happen. Just a terrible job by that girl on the Chicago team. But coming up next, we'll talk to Jeff Parles. We'll do a little baseball, some NBA, some NFL, a little bit of everything. Excited to talk to Jeff. That is next. This is a Shoulda Bet More podcast. All right, we are back. Shoulda Bet More, and he is back. You can catch him on Sports by the Book. You can catch him on this podcast where he is a fan favorite, and he returns. It is Jeff Parles. Jeff, what's up, man? Thanks for coming on.
It's good to be with you, Will. It's kind of crazy that we're already in June, which means about 3 months from now, I will be complaining about some ridiculous college football beat that we suffered in week 0 or week 1, which, in all honesty, well, I can't wait for that. I really can't.
Me neither. We'll get to a bunch of things here. We'll start with baseball and we'll get to your Mets here in a moment. But just, hey, you mentioned it, 2 months in, right around Memorial Day. This is usually when Memorial Day would be. Memorial Day was a week earlier. So right around now is 2 months in, third of the season, roughly. What are some of your big takeaways, your biggest takeaway here from the baseball season?
Let's go league by league here. The American League, I'm stunned that the Guardians are as good as they are. I know Jose Ramirez is a stud. I know their pitching's been better than expected. The fact that David Fry has turned into Babe Ruth is not sustainable, more likely than not. But they are a very nice, pleasant surprise. And Will, in watching the series they played against the Mets probably about 2 weeks ago, you saw a team that played their behinds off at every turn. And that's something I appreciate about them and appreciate about a lot of these teams in that American League Central that are much better than I thought they would be. I thought Kansas City had a shot at competing for the division. I didn't expect them to be as good as they've been through the first 2 months. Seth Lugo's been awesome. Reagans has been amazing as well. We expected him to be really good, but he's just been awesome so far this year. Minnesota, I still think, is fine in that division. The American League West is mediocre. I even though I still think it probably will find a way to get a second team out of that division. Disappointed in what I've seen from Houston, obviously. Disappointed in what I've seen from the Rangers. The Mariners I feel like the Mariners should have a bigger lead in that division than they do. But look, that's again a team that I don't love. I didn't love what they did in the offseason for the second consecutive year. And then the AL East, the Orioles are really good, but they're not on the Yankees level. no one in the American League is on the Yankees level. And the fact that they're doing this with Garrett Cole, who knows still when we're going to exactly see him. I still have questions about the longevity of the rotation. I'm still not 100% sold on that. But you have the two best players in the American League hitting back-to-back in the lineup. Right now, I would still vote Soto as the MVP, even though Judge was unbelievable in the month of May, as we know, and started Jude off pretty darn well last night as well. But look, it's baseball. We know weird stuff can happen, Will. But this kind of feels like the buster year finally for the Yankees to at least get back to the World Series. Again, the Dodgers, the Phillies. I know the remember the Braves won their title without Acuna when he was hurt in 2021. So look, but it feels like at this point, the Yankees, it is a massive disappointment if they're not at least in the World Series. You could push it to not winning the whole thing, but there's some really good teams on the National League side as well.
Yep, totally agree with just about all of that. And let's go division by division. You tell me who's going to win each one. AL East sounds like you like the Yankees.
Yeah, I think the Yankees are going to win the division, and then the Orioles will be the top wild card. I think that's just the way the Orioles are a product of being in a division with the best team in the American League. So,
AL Central, Cleveland enters Sunday, 6-game lead over Kansas City in the loss column.
Yeah, I don't think Minnesota's dead here, but the problem is, and look, we've seen teams make double-digit game comebacks. We've seen bigger comebacks, but there's something about this Cleveland team, Will. There's just something that is very different. And sometimes you just look for, I know it's a long season and usually sample size wins out, but sometimes you just catch lightning in a bottle for a whole season. And I think Cleveland ends up winning this division. There will be a second team out of this division. It's just a matter of will Kansas City be able to hold up for a whole 162. I think Minnesota will win mid-80s. It's just a matter of will that be enough to be the 6 seed or the 5 seed potentially in the American League.
AL West.
I still think Texas. I think Texas is going to win it still. They will get healthier pitching wise. Scherzer seemingly has made made the last step to finally being able to realistically throw again. John Gray will come back. I don't know if we'll see DeGrom, but if you see DeGrom in September, if they're in competition, hey, maybe. But I think just for them, and I know it's weird to say, for them, the pedigree of just what happened last year, I like them better than Houston, and I just don't trust Seattle. So I would say Texas will win the West.
And Minnesota plus 330 right now. Texas plus 350. Either of those trigger a bet for you?
Yeah, it would be Texas. I like that Texas one. I think when push comes to shove here, and again, Will, all it takes, the one good thing in that division with the way that it's played out right now, look, Seattle has a 4-game lead. They're playing better. I feel like they should be 8 or 9 games up right now. And when you let teams hang around, you and I both know what can happen when you let teams hang around. Look, could Seattle have this big run and by the end of June be up 8, 9 games? Yeah, sure. But I still think Texas catches them. And then it's just a question of, all right, is Seattle in there as a wild card? Does a second team out of the East? Does a second team out of the Central grab that third wild card, I should say? I really do think, Will, that we're getting either Minnesota or Kansas City, and then a second team out of the West. I know Texas is underwater right now. I know the Astros are underwater, but I think one of them will end up in that mid-80s, which I think will be good enough. And I mean, the Red Sox, I don't buy them. The Rays have been a massive disappointment, and the Blue Jays are the most infuriating team in the American League by a wide margin. So I think we end up with 2 from the East, 2 from the Central, and 2 from the West. We get a natural one wild card from each division, which we haven't had yet in this format.
National League. Can the Braves catch the Phillies, or the Phillies going to pull away and run and hide with this thing?
I think the Phillies are more than good enough to win this division. I do expect it to get closer, Will. I expect it to get closer. Now, the one thing that I will say, this is very different than what happened in 2022, because I think the Phillies are more, and look, that Met team in 22 was awesome until they weren't in September. But I think the Phillies are more well-rounded. The only difference with that team in 22 is that Diaz was the best reliever in baseball. the Phillies don't have someone of that caliber at the back end, even though their bullpen has been much, much improved from what I thought it was going to be. Their starting rotation, I mean, assuming Suarez isn't out for an extended period of time with the injury he suffered on Saturday night, you're talking 3 high-end guys who are quality of number 1 starters in that rotation. That's really hard over 162 to catch, and it's even harder to get beat in the postseason when you have something like that, even though we know baseball happens. Look, the Phillies should win the division. The Braves are going to be the top wild card, Will. The race for the 5 and the 6 seeds are going to be disasters all the way through. I don't think any of those teams, I think everyone, even with the disastrous month that the Mets have had in May, the only 2 teams that I think are completely dead in the National League wild card race are the Rockies and the Marlins. Other than that, again, would I place a bet on the Mets or the Pirates to win, to make the playoffs? No, I wouldn't. But if you told me, hey, one of those teams is 2 games out with 11 to play, but the way that this is played out, I can't say I would be stunned, because everyone past Atlanta, so the Dodgers, the Phillies, and the Brewers, who I think will win their divisions at this rate, everyone past those 3 teams and the Braves, they're all mediocre. They all have massive flaws. 2 teams making the playoffs at 83 and 79 is squarely in play in the NL.
So you answered something, I guess. I'll ask it anyway. It hasn't crossed your mind that even Atlanta could maybe miss the playoffs if you get a Sale injury, if something else happens, because they really haven't hit.
I just
holes in
think
the rotation.
It would take multiple. And look, Strider's already gone. We know that. I think it would take like Sale. And look, Sale, we know Sale is more than capable of getting injured, just with the history that he's had injury wise. I don't think the teams behind them are good enough. And the lineup that they still have, even if they have starting rotation issues, even with Acuna gone for the year, well, that's still what, the 3rd best lineup in the National League? I just have a hard time seeing the teams behind them being good enough to see the Braves flat out missing the playoffs unless if something really, really epic happens. I mean, Will, 87 and 75 should be more than enough to get the top wild card this year in the NL.
NL Central, Milwaukee with a big lead entering Sunday. And any chance the Cubbies, somebody else jumps up and catches Milwaukee?
I've been very disappointed in the Cubs. After watching them in April, Will, I thought, all right, you know what? If the starting pitching holds up and they get some help in their bullpen at the trade deadline, the Cubs can win a series off the Dodgers. They can win a series off Philadelphia or Atlanta. That last month was awful. And now you're starting to see the cracks in the starting rotation where guys were pitching over their heads for the first month plus. Now Imanaga finally had a bad start. I think Assad's going to start coming back to earth as well. I think the Brewers, I think we underestimated, at least me, I underestimated just the stability of that roster still. Yeah, they traded Corbin Burns. Yeah, Woodruff's still not healthy. But that lineup is still pretty much what it was a year ago when they won the division relatively handily last year. So I really do think more so than anything that Milwaukee will win that division. I'm not buying this run by the Cardinals. I'm not buying it. Just don't think they're good enough. And Arenado, just look at Arenado's numbers. Arenado's a shell of himself at this point. He's a mediocre hitter and he's a mediocre defender now. Goldschmidt has turned it on a little bit. I like Masson Wynn a ton. I think he's going to be a stud, even though he's already been great so far this year. But I like Milwaukee in that division. I would say that the Cubs are most likely of the other 4 teams to still grab a wild card, but it would not shock me if it's 1 and that's it in the Central again.
And the Dodgers are gone in the West, obviously.
I mean, if the Dodgers don't win the West, that means Betts, Ohtani, and Freeman and Glasnow probably all got hurt. I mean, they're just so much better than everybody else. Now, for the postseason, Will, I do have a question, because once you get past Will Smith in that lineup, Teoscar Hernandez is as good of a power hitter as he is. He's a flawed hitter. The bottom end of that lineup is really average. Look, there is a way they get beat early again in the postseason, but for 162, no one's beating them in the West. None of those teams are good enough.
All right, your Mets. Level of disappointment, just your takeaway here, because they could go any direction in terms of, I wouldn't be shocked if they trade Alonso. I don't know, expect it, but when they've been as bad as they've been, I don't see how you can just cling to this core. I don't know what you would do. I'll ask it this way. If I put you in charge, how would you handle the Mets here going forward?
I really don't know. That's really kind of the problem here, Will. There's no good solutions here. It's either you go forward with this core and look, well, 2022 is surely just a blip at this point. Like that was the fluke year for this group that they played way above their heads. Diaz, look, I think Edwin Diaz is clearly not healthy on top of it. But that core, and look, I tweeted this after the Lopez incident last week. That locker room is sorely missing true leaders. And the only guys who have been consistent now who are there from 22 to now without missing an extended period of time, Lindor, Alonso, Nimmo, and McNeil. Those are the four guys that, and yeah, Marte was there, but Marte missed most of last year. Same deal with Diaz. But those are the guys that were there. And there seems to be some sort of culture issue in that locker room. Now, I don't know who you put the blame on for that. I don't think anyone really knows unless if you're in there. Now, McNeil's an abjectly bad baseball player right now. I don't know what happened to him. He was obviously all-star 2 years ago, 3 years ago as well. He sucks now, Will. And I think that's a big issue. And he's also he's an emotional guy, to put it politely. He would be the guy that I look to trade first. He's still on a reasonable contract. If someone thinks he still has it in him, you might be able to get something reasonable back for him. Alonso, I think at this point, unless if you're within 4 games of the wild card on July 20th, it's very hard to justify trading Alonso. If you're more than 4 games out, which the Mets currently are, I think it's a slam dunk. You got to trade him, get as much as you can, and then you try to re-sign him in the offseason. Look, it makes it harder when you're not the incumbent team, but that's the way that I would look to do with it. Lindor, I don't know. You can't trade a guy with that contract. That's the guy you got to build around, and you got to hope that he starts finding it earlier in seasons than he has. Nimmo, same deal. Nimmo, look, for a guy who was hitting in the 220s, his OBP is still good. Like, you would take an OBP in the 360s, 370s like you have for a guy hitting that low. I think he'll be fine long term. But Alonso, I would trade if you're not within 4 games on July 20th. I would trade McNeil. I would trade all the auxiliary bullpen guys who have not been good and just take low-level stuff back. Just take anything. Maybe you hit lightning in a bottle. You trade Quintana for sure at the trade deadline. You see, I guess you trade Severino too because he's on the 1-year deal. So yeah,
somebody
I
would
think
take Manaea. Manaea would have some appeal. Somebody would take Manaea.
Someone would take Manaea as well. I mean,
somebody would take J.E. Martinez, I would think.
You would imagine. Like, again, I'm leaving out these guys on the shorter deals because I think they would be obvious the most that they would be dealt. Marte would be an interesting one. If someone thinks there's something left with Marte, yeah, you probably could get something. I know there's been some rumblings that Kansas City might be interested in Marte's skill set. But look, I would, if you're out of it, I would very happily trade it. Basically, everyone but Lindor and Limo and Alvarez. Because really, Will, this season has fallen apart when Alvarez got hurt. I mean, just look at the record with and without him this year. They've completely fallen apart with him on the IL. He's a guy that I want them to build around. I know there's flaws in his game, but he power hitting catcher, those don't exist very much anymore. Well, so he to me, Lindor, Alvarez. You hope one of the guys you got in the Scherzer or Verlander deal a year ago, one of those 3 guys turns out to be a core player moving forward. And Nimmo, those are really your offensive cores moving forward. And also, too, I don't think Mendoza's made out to be a major league manager. I really don't. I think there's just some decisions that he's made over the last month where, look, sometimes you just push every wrong button. It happens when things are going awry. But I don't think he's made it out to be a major league manager. I don't think it's his fault that it's imploded like this. But there's enough things we've seen over these first 2 months that kind of dictate to me, hey, he's a bench coach. He's a AAA manager. He's not a major league manager. It's kind of like Luis Rojas to me, in all honesty. Rojas, by any account to me, good AAA manager. Obviously, he got the job under circumstances that he wasn't supposed to. He's not a major league manager. He's a great AAA manager. He's a bench coach, third base coach. That kind of seems what Mendoza is to me.
Yeah, and it seems like they're in between where they want to be competitive enough where Cohen's wallet can be a factor. Where a guy like Soto, a big time free agent's not going to want to come to nothing. If you just scratch it down, if you just tear it down to the studs, it's going to be hard to sell that to the big time free agent. So it feels like they're trying to be competitive enough where they can still attract a major free agent, but they are trying to, on one hand, rebuild. Have you lost faith in Cohen's just? Is it a new owner thing, or you still feel good about him being your owner here?
I don't know. I mean, look, it's kind of incredible. I'm still stunned that it's gone as poorly as it has. But look, I think that it's still early in the tenure. It's grand scheme of things, still early in the tenure. It has been ugly, other than realistically speaking, 4.5 months. But look, you got to see. And I will say this: the Juan Soto thing is a pipe dream at this point. I know that Hal has said what he said. I know what Soto said in San Diego, that it's an open race for anyone. Does anyone in their right mind realistically believe that the Yankees and Soto are not getting a deal done? It's the perfect match. I don't think there's ever been a baseball player that's been, in this era at least, matched so perfectly with a franchise and a culture of a franchise and a ballpark that they happen to play in. And Juan Soto is with the New York Yankees. He is meant to be a Yankee long term. There's no way that doesn't get done. And if it doesn't get done, that is a humongous scar on this ownership in the Bronx, because he's the perfect player. Pay him. You're the freaking Steinbrenner family, for goodness sake. Don't let him get out of the building. And if he, for the Yankees' sake, if he somehow goes to the Mets, I mean, that's just, if I were a Yankee fan, I'd be beyond pissed if that were to happen. If he went to, he's not going to go to the Dodgers. At some point, there has to be some sort of limit. I mean, realistically speaking, it's the Yankees, the Mets, and if the Padres decide to start spending money again, they're like, hey, Juan, we made a mistake, try to come back. Like, those are the only three spots that make any sense for me.
Yeah, I mean, it's weird to say about a guy that's at his age with his skill level, but there's just not that many teams that are willing to write a check for $500 million, which he's gonna, yeah.
The Cubs,
the one team,
the Cubs would be
the Cubs or the Giants. Giants seems like they've been itching to try to sign these guys, whether it's Correa, whether it's Otani, Judge. They've been sniffing around these big players.
If I were Soto, I wouldn't want any part of that. I mean,
because I don't
think that team's particularly close to really winning on a big scale. For one, I think actually, I know as ridiculous as this would sound, but I think the Mets with Soto would be closer to winning than the Giants would be at this point, because there's just enough pieces on the Mets that would make a little bit of sense. That, hey, if things go right, you get something, not quite 2022 scan, but you get my point. But the Cubs, that ballpark in San Francisco, before I get to the Cubs, that ballpark in San Francisco is brutal ballpark for left-handed hitters. Obviously, we know Bonds did what he did there, but that was enhanced, as we know. So, look, I would say I really don't think the Dodgers will be in on it. I really think it's the Yankees, the Mets. I'll throw the Cubs and the Padres, even though the Padres may be unrealistic at this point. I mean, does Boston care about actually spending money at this point? I mean, he would be great in that city, in that ballpark too, but there's no faith in the Red Sox actually spending any money at this point.
Last baseball one. Any awards, futures that are worth betting at the moment?
Well, let's see how long Ranger Suarez is out for, right? If he happens to be out for any sort of time, because then that would be one of those where the National League Cy Young race feels a little bit peculiar to me, where I don't think Zach Wheeler should be the favorite right now. I really don't. I don't think he should be the favorite at 3-1. I think, especially, again, if Suarez misses time, it changes it. But I think Glasnow should be ahead of Wheeler at this point, with just the rate he's striking dudes out and the way he has pitched so far this year. I don't mind a shot. I wish I was getting a little more than 6-1, but I don't mind a shot on him. And then look, Soto at 3-1, I think is still a good bet in the American League MVP. I know Judge just had this absurd month, but when it's all said and done, I think Soto's going to have a more consistent year. Yeah, Judge may lead the American League in home runs, but I think Soto's still the guy who ends up winning that award. I don't think 3-1's a bad bet on Soto.
Yeah, that's going to be very fascinating. I can't remember such a direct, if it is just teammate versus teammate race where the Yankees do run away with the division. Look, we enter Sunday, they're tied in the lost time with Baltimore, so we're far from that. Maybe a Baltimore Oriole has their say, but if the Yankees win 105, 108 games, and you got Judge with 54 homers and Soto doing what he does, and it's one teammate versus another, I'm sure there's been a scenario. And look, National League's not that dissimilar with the Dodger guys, but I can't remember off the top of my head a situation where it's just so directly one teammate versus another for the MVP.
Yeah, and it just and usually we like, oh, they'll split the votes. Okay, there's no one else to vote for realistically in first place in the American League MVP race. I mean, look, I love Bobby Witt. Bobby Witt's an awesome player. There's no way in hell Bobby Witt's winning the MVP this year. There's no chance. And he's plus 330 right now with DraftKings. Gunnar Henderson, love him too. He's not winning the MVP if the Orioles don't win the American League East. Plus 450. Kyle Tucker's 6-1. There's no chance of that happening. Like the only one like down the board, just kind of looking at it like Jose Ramirez to 17-1. Like, yeah, if Judge got hurt and Soto cooled down, there's an avenue for Jose Ramirez. There's an avenue. I just don't see the voters giving Jose Ramirez that award. I just don't see it. So, yeah, I think it's a Soto or a Judge, assuming health is in play here, Will.
NBA, who do you like in the finals?
I like the Celtics in 7. I think this is, by the way, this has been like other than the T-Wolves Nuggets series, this has been the least interesting NBA playoffs
Totally
I can
agree.
ever remember. The Eastern Conference playoffs were basically a farce. Actually, other than the Knicks Sixers series, which was legitimately fun.
That was fun.
That was a legitimately fun series. But
Seems like years ago with all the injuries since that.
Yeah, well, it also feels like it happened 3 months ago. That feels like it happened in 2021, in all honesty. But the East playoffs have been a farce. The West playoffs, I mean, the fact that Minnesota can beat Denver and then look that bad in a series against Dallas, I'm kind of perplexed by how that even happened. And to me, Luka's the best player in this series. So there is a legitimate argument for Dallas to win this series. But when it's all said and done, I trust Boston's role guys more than I trust Dallas's role guys. I know Dallas has won all these 3 series without home court, but this is a different home court. Even though Boston has had some weird, the last few years, weird outings on their home floor in the playoffs. But I just think in the end, the better team wins out. I think Boston wins this in 7. I really am not – the only intriguing storyline here, like everyone's trying to make all the Celtics clutch, Tatum good. Like, I don't care about that storyline. That was the storyline of 2021 when they lost to Golden State. Give me a new storyline. Give me something different here. Or 2022, I should say, when they lost to Golden State. And then on the Dallas side, like the only interesting thing is Kyrie possibly beating Boston, which would be all sorts of funny, at least to me, because I don't like Boston fans. I don't like Kyrie either. Like, all right, well, I think it would actually be a little more funny if Kyrie beat a team from Boston here with everything that went on when he was a Celtic. But very unintriguing series to me, Will. Really just not – I'll watch because I need to, but really – really uninteresting playoffs all the way through, and kind of for the NBA, where the product should be getting better and better every year. This was the least interesting year I can remember, and I don't know if that was because just I was more into betting college hoops this year. I don't know if it's just because I've had like a lot of people have had enough of players just taking days off. There were a lot of major injuries that impacted the postseason again. Obviously, Giannis didn't play. Embiid was not 100%. But it's very, very, very disinterested this year, just NBA-wise, all the way across.
Yeah, and Luka, as great as he is, he's tough to watch too. Constantly, whining for foul calls, reviews. Every call is an injustice to him. It's tough. Yeah. It really is tough to take.
That was the one thing, at least in the Minnesota series, and this kind of makes it a little bit aggravating. Like, Luka didn't do that much like that in the Minnesota series. He just went out there like, all right, I'm going to kick your ass. I'm going to kick your ass in this series. And that's what he did. And if Luka did that every night, instead of just whining like you're saying, like, yeah, Luka would be a much better. Look, Luka's already an amazing watch, but there wouldn't be I have to watch this guy whine the whole game. Like, there is some aspect to that for sure.
Last couple, NFL, any takeaway from the schedule, any bet you made based on the schedule being released?
It's pretty funny. I haven't made any bets yet, Will. I haven't made anything yet. But I just it's so interesting seeing the dichotomy of positions on how schedule sequence can occur, where you have Sports Illustrated. I just could take the Jets for a second. Where Sports Illustrated wrote an article, I forget who, I think it was Connor. It was either Gilberto Manzano or it was Connor Orr. I don't remember who wrote it. Basically writing that the Jets should be furious at the league for the way they scheduled them, with all the front loading all those primetime games, having to go Monday, Sunday, Thursday the first 3 weeks, having to play 2 Thursday games, Halloween and earlier, having to go London to Monday night against arguably the most important home game they'll have all year against Buffalo. And then you had Warren Sharp writing about how the Jets actually caught a great break because they're going to play potentially all these rookie quarterbacks earlier in the year. And I was like, wait a second, how can first off, I agree more with Orr or Manzano, whoever wrote that for SI, than I do with Sharp, because like, all right, there's a 0% chance that Drake May is starting by week 5 for the Patriots. Like, Jacoby Brissett is starting the first month for New England. Are you convinced J.J. McCarthy's going to win the job in Minnesota? You convinced of that? I'm not. I think Darnold's going to be the starter week 1 there. And probably with the way that Minnesota schedule breaks, where their first 6 weeks are brutal, other than the week 1 game against the Giants, I think Darnold's going to end up playing the majority of the season there in Minnesota. And then who was the other early rookie quarterback that the Jets play? Knicks. I don't know. I don't think it matters who plays quarterback for Denver. They're all terrible. So that doesn't really matter. But look, I know there'd be some people that would look at that and be like, all right, well, it is what it is. And that's kind of how I look at it. The only thing I will say, just eyeballing, doing more things, we're going to start on Sports by the Book, basically doing a team a day, not this week, but the week after. And we're going to roll through that for the next 2 months before we get going with the season. The biggest takeaway that I have, even just from doing more research, is that the NFC North is going to be really, really good. And Minnesota, if they were in the NFC South, and this all depends on you, how much you believe in McCarthy or Darnold or whoever is the quarterback. If they were in the NFC South, I'd give them a legitimate shot to win that division. Give them a legitimate shot to win that division. Because they're in the NFC North, I think they're going to be one of the 3 worst teams in the NFL. I really do think they're going to be a bad team. And it's because of the strength of the other 3 teams. Detroit, their defense is vastly improved going into this year from last year. What did we talk about all last year with Detroit? Their defense sucks. And if their defense is good and Goff is at least somewhat at the level he was last year, there's a legitimate argument to be made Detroit should be the favorite to come out of the NFC. There's a legitimate argument to be made with that. The Packers, there's no reason for me to think Love's going to get worse. I just think he's going to get better. I like what they've done this offseason. I think they're going to be really good. And the Bears, I really wish they had fired Eberflus. If they had fired Eberflus and hired an offensive guy to be their head coach, I would look at the Bears as saying, all right, within 3 years, they should be playing in the NFC title game, maybe even in the Super Bowl. Caleb Williams, I don't know why there was so much noise of, oh, Jaden Daniels should go. Like, Caleb Williams was so clearly the best player in this draft. Just skill set wise and his ability. I don't care of what like all the bad actors in this space try to say about him. The kid is an unbelievable player. I don't care that he showed emotion after they lost to Notre Dame. Like, that was if I were Caleb Williams, I would be infuriated too with what happened to me at USC last year. That team was way too good to lose all those games. So I think the Bears, if there's one team in the NFC that could, really the whole NFL, that could come out of nowhere and we were looking at like week 17, like, holy crap, this team's 11-4. This team is 10-5, tied for the division lead with 2 weeks to go. Chicago's that team for me this year, Will, because that defense should be awesome. And if Williams is as good as I think he can be right away, that team has the chance to be awesome. Oh, and by the way, they have a last place schedule on top of it.
Last minute or two, the Jets. I actually like them just because I think their schedule compared to the Bills and the Dolphins is so much easier. And they do get some of these warm weather teams late in the year in New York, the Rams, the Dolphins. The Bills have to play all 4 teams from the conference title games last year, plus the Texans, plus, of course, the Jets and the Dolphins that combined 4 times. The Dolphins have a tough schedule. The Dolphins have a lot of games in cold weather late in the year. That's not a team that travels well. They play Cleveland and the Jets the last 2 weeks, and they play in Lambeau late in the season. So I don't trust Tua in cold weather. I think there's a massive schedule advantage with the Jets. Plus, I like the fact that they sort of ate their vegetables. They rebuilt the offensive line. They still won 7 games with no quarterback last year. Now you figure Rodgers, they can keep him healthy. I think that team wins 11, 12 games. I think they win the division.
I can't disagree with you, Will. There are a lot of poking holes this offseason. Oh, Rodgers is a 41-year-old quarterback coming off an Achilles tear. How can he possibly still play at a high level? Guys, we just need above average quarterback play. Yeah. Like, that's it. The Jets just need above average quarterback play. If they get above average quarterback play, and you brought up a very good point, and I've made this point to others as well. The Jets actually caught a huge break finishing third last year as opposed to last. Because the last place schedule, and there are some people that think New England's going to be surprisingly good. They are going to be better, but I don't know if it's going to show in a win-loss because of what happened when you did the cross games. The Jets, instead of getting the crosses, Will, of at Cincinnati, the Chargers, and at Chicago, drew Minnesota in London, which I think, by the way, big break for the Jets with that, getting that game in London, because that crowd in Minneapolis would have been on fire with Rodgers returning there. You and I both know that, and that's a great crowd to begin with. The Broncos, who I think, which is, by the way, they're one team actually that I think the books have off. I think the Broncos are going to be the worst team in the NFL this year. I think their roster is awful. Their quarterbacks are awful. And even though I like Sean Payton and I haven't turned on him like most people have, there's only so much you can do when you have no talent. I think that team's going to be awful, 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 awful. And then who was the third? They play at Pittsburgh instead of at Cincinnati, which there's only so many times. I know we've been saying this for like 5 years now, but at some point, Tomlin's got to go underwater with one of these teams. And I think the Steelers are in a weird spot where I think their roster's better, but I think they're going to get some natural regression that might cause them to be a 7-8 win team, even though they could very easily be a 9-10 win team. And also, I think Justin Fields is going to be starting by week 5 there. I think Russell Wilson is shot. I think he's done. They're not paying him any money at all. Remember, Denver's paying his whole salary. If Wilson sucks over the first month, what's the point? Just go to Fields. So, yeah, but to finish off on the Jets, you mentioned it. Getting Miami at home week 18 is huge. Having that game in your building when it could be sub-freezing, and you and I both know, Will, there's a real shot that game's 272. There's a real shot that Sunday Night Football, someone, probably both teams, are playing for either the division or to just even make the field at that point. And you get that game when it's 15 degrees and windy at MetLife, sign me up. Sign me up right now. Sign me up 100%. For that right now. The Jet roster last year, like you said, they won 7 games with 32nd rated quarterback play last year. You would expect if Rodgers makes it through a whole season, they win at least 10. I think they're winning 12. I think they're going 12-5. It's just a matter of getting through that early stretch with staying healthy. And also, too, at the time, I didn't love the pick of Olu Fashanu. I didn't love it. But now thinking about it, as we've gotten a month plus away from the draft, taking the tackle, who's to me still a little bit of a developmental project, when you have guys on the roster where, so picking Fashanu like they did, Will, where Tyron Smith hasn't played a full season in years. Morgan Moses has battled some injuries over his career. You just let him learn, and when one of these guys gets hurt, you slide in, and it's much better than whatever jabroni they would have played anyway. So a 12-win team, I think the Bills are making the playoffs this year. I actually think the market's gone the other way on Buffalo, where I think they were so overrated for a few years that now they're actually a little bit underrated. So I think we end up with 2 teams out of the AFC. So I think Miami's going to miss the playoffs altogether.
Jeff, this was the best. You're the best. Appreciate you coming on. Let everyone know where they can find you.
Yeah, Jeff Parles on Twitter. My show, it's myself and Alex White, Sports by the Book, Tuesday through Saturday now, noon Eastern time on the South Point Studio YouTube page. Free to subscribe. Just hit that subscribe button. You'll get all the notifications. So noon Eastern time, Tuesday through Saturday.
Appreciate the time. We'll catch up here down the road.
Absolutely will.
All right, that will do it. Thank you to Jeff Parles. We will be back on Wednesday. Don't forget to rate, review, subscribe. Going to do a giveaway contest at some point with people that leave reviews. So if you can leave a review on Apple, much appreciated, and you will be entered into the contest whenever we decide how we're going to do that, when we're going to do that, things like that. But other than that, we'll be back Wednesday, talk some finals. See you guys then.